Good morning, everyone. It is 9:15 in the morning on August 24th, 2019, and we are continuing our Chord Mojo versus AudioQuest Dragonfly Cobalt comparison. The last video was over the soundstage, the volume, the power, and hopefully that was of some significance, some help to you. This one is really starting the whole sound comparison process, and today's test is going to be about the bass response on both of these devices. As always, we are using an A/B switch, which is plugged into both devices with 3.5mm outs, respectively, and I am using the Allo Audio S4R as our reference class closed-back headphone for this test. So let's get started. We are going to test 4 songs: Mountains, Angel, Moons, and the drum solo by Jack Bruce and Simon Phillips. Each of those songs is going to be placed down below at the playhead, so you can skip whenever you want to whichever portion. There's going to be an A, and then there's going to be a B section. It's going to be named A and B. A is going to be for the AudioQuest. B is going to be for the Mojo. We're going to go back and forth. Hopefully it stays consistent, because there are times when I mix things up. Use that playhead if you need to skip around and you want to just get to a particular song, or you want to test back and forth quicker. So hopefully this is going to be much more help than in the past. Let's get started with Mountains. Currently, as I said, I have A switched on, which is the AudioQuest Cobalt. And we're going to start at 50%. Oh, that's loud. We're going to start at 50%. Windows kept going, the volume bell thing kept going off, because that's a very loud, comfortable listening volume. Let's start with Mountains. Here we go. There is this kind of this static type of sound in the background that fades away, but it starts off pretty strong. It's like a static you hear from an old tape deck. If you've ever used a tape deck before, you put in a tape and then you just play. There's no music. It's just playing. You hear that static. It's that kind of a sizzle type of sound, and that's the sound that is prevalent at first, but fades away as the song continues. There's this tick-tock that is clear, clean, precise. Good separation of, there's a rolling drum that comes in. Not a whole lot of drum impact. You know that it's there. It's simply not interacting or interfering with any of the other frequencies. And now there are some string instruments that are coming in, plucking of those string instruments. It sounds comfortable listening level. Let's continue to increase the volume. Let's go to 65% or so. And at 65%, this is fairly loud. Let's continue to halfway of the song, where the crescendo starts building up. And the crescendo is building up at this point. The organ is going to come in very strongly right now. Excellent separation of instruments. No muddiness at all. So right around this point, 2 minutes and 5 seconds to 2 minutes and 10 seconds or so, what happens is that there's this rolling drum, like a thunderclap. That's what it sounds like. That's what it's supposed to mimic, I think. And it's in the background. It just rolls faster and faster and faster. The Cobalt is able to reproduce that really, really well. There's no lingering distortion. There is no interference with the other bass frequencies. It's fast as can be, especially when you couple it with a headphone like the S4R. And it sounds like it's reminiscent of rolling thunder, just faster, sped up. Let's keep going for a little bit longer. You can hear the organ. The organ is not overpowering any of the other instruments. You can hear the different tonalities. Organ is clean and clear. I've heard it much more detailed than other devices. but this is fairly accurate representation in the sense that you hear the organ, but the organ is not itself overpowering the other instruments in the mix at this juncture. It sounds like you're sitting in a theater, like a movie theater, and listening on those theater speakers. Okay, so that was a fairly good representation. Let's go to the Mojo. We're going to switch to the Mojo here. And there we are. Okay, Mojo is selected. AB switch to Mojo. And let's play again. The volume is double orange. I'm going to increase that. We're at the first level of double green. I'm going to increase that again. And that's first level of teal. That sizzle is not as clean on the Mojo as it was on the Cobalt. It's still there, it's just more muffled. There's supposed to be this rolling bass at the background. That also seems a bit more muffled than it was on the Cobalt. Still present. Hear the tick-tock, fairly accurate. I don't sense any difference between the Mojo and the Cobalt with respect to that. Yeah, the one thing I do notice is that when that rolling drum just does come in, it's not as fast a roll-off as it was on the Cobalt. I mean, it's a minor difference, but it's discernible with an A/B test. I'm going to increase the volume again, and I'm going to go up to double blue, the first level of blue, and skip ahead to the middle. We're going to get the crescendo, and we're going to pay attention to 2 minutes and 10 seconds approximately. That organ is much more in your face on the Mojo than it is on the Cobalt. That rolling bass, so that rolling bass around 2 minutes and 10 seconds, on the Cobalt it was much better separated. It sounded like a drum that was rolling, like it was like being played really, really fast, and it was an accurate representation because it was being separated from the organ frequency. What the Mojo does is it sounds like something, right? It sounds like a rolling something. More like a rumble than a drum being played really fast. And it gives a very different presentation, a very different appearance to the song than the Cobalt. In this way, with the Cobalt, you know that it's a drum being played fast. That's the tonality. With the Mojo, it sounds like a rumble, and you don't know what that rumble is. And on top of that, you get this melding of the organ frequency with that low bass rumble. And you may really enjoy that. The concern might be for anybody who's looking for a much more accurate representation and wants to pinpoint the instrument, right? They want to say, I know what that is, that rumble. It's a bass drum or whatever. I don't know what kind of drum it was. It's a drum. And I can hear it, and I know that the person playing that drum is playing it at X speed. You can likely figure that out with the Cobalt, not so much with the Mojo because of the way that the tonality is represented. Okay, so let's go to Angel by Massive Attack. And Angel has a lot of manufactured bass. And so there's layers and layers and layers of manufactured bass in this song. Let's see how the separation is presented between these two devices. Let's start with A, which is going to be the Cobalt. And let's switch there. Where are you, Cobalt? There you are. Okay. And let's start. That low rumble is really nicely presented, and it's really rumbly. The volume is at 65%, I think. Yeah. That bass hit, that drum hit is, I wouldn't say it's ear piercing. It's sharp, but not sibilant, not ear piercing, just sharp when it comes down to hits, like tick, now, now. Like when it hits, when I just said that, you can feel the tiny sharpness, but it's not hurtful. Very fast bass roll off, meaning there's no lingering reverberation. I can hear a low bass, like a rumbly low texture bass, and then there's another bass frequency that's playing, more of an interference. Then you have that drum that goes tick, tick, like there. Then you have a horn instrument that's playing, and the vocalist is starting now. At this point, I'm listening for everything in the mix. The vocalist is clear, no distortion, no melding of frequencies. That very low bass frequency can be heard. That drum is easily discernible. There's that middle layer of some sort of bass instrument, synth bass, that's prevalent. Now you have like an electric piano or electric guitar coming in. And now the drum is playing louder. Excellent separation of instruments. Fast drum strikes. Fast reverberation. Or the reverberation doesn't last particularly long. So what I hear is that the bass of this song is well separated. Like I can hear the multiple layers. I heard at least 2, probably 3 layers of bass. There's that sub bass rumble that's part of the song always. Then there's this middle layer of distorted bass that comes in, and then there's the drum that plays din 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 tch, din 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 tch, in that manner. Then you have the horn instrument that comes in. Then you have the vocalist that comes in. And then right around, I think, 1 minute of this song or so, it's either an electric guitar or it's an electric piano. One of the two that comes in. And then when all the mix is in, you can hear each and every separate instrument. None of it is muddy. Now, can it be cleaner and clearer and more separated in other devices? Absolutely. I know for a fact that it has been represented in a much more defined way in, say, the THX series. But we're talking about a USB stick, and this is really, really excellent, in my opinion, an excellent separation of all the instruments. Not muddy. Now let's switch to the Mojo, and let's find out if the Mojo can keep pace. Okay. Switch to the Mojo, switch to B, and let's start again with Angel. That low rumble is pretty loud. I'm going to decrease the volume to 2 teals, I guess. It's pretty obvious to me that the bass, that low rumble on the Mojo is emphasized where it was leaner on the Cobalt. Not by minor degrees, but I think of a pretty noticeable degree. And it reverberates longer, just slightly longer. That drum hit, dun dun dun, dun dun dun, it's not as sharp as it was on the Cobalt, where that hit like that was much sharper on the Cobalt than it is on the Mojo. On the Mojo, it seems rounded off and blunted. The horn instrument is also more muted. I'll increase the volume again to double blue. The vocal is clean. That background rumble is a little muddy, though. Now you have that electric piano / guitar. That also sounds a bit muddy because of that sub bass frequency. Now all the mixes playing, I can hear a low bass rumble, and then I can hear the drum, the electric guitar, I think, and the vocalist. But I don't hear that middle layer of bass that I thought I heard on the Cobalt. So here's what I can say. Between the two, the Mojo simply has a warmer presentation. There's no doubt about that. Moreover, the definition and the separation of instruments on the Mojo is simply not as clear as it was on the Cobalt. Like, I can hear two layers of bass on the Mojo. That sub bass rumble, and then there's that the drum strikes. But on the Cobalt, I thought I heard three, right? There's a sub bass rumble, then there's a middle layer of distortion that comes in, then there's the drum strike. And all three of those were present, from what I heard, were present even when everything was playing in the mix. But with the Mojo, it sounds more like there's only two layers, and when everything is playing, there's more muddiness involved. For example, the drum strikes were not as accurate, not as sharp, although, again, not hurtful, not as sharp on the Mojo as it was presented on the Cobalt. Secondly, when that electric, I'm fairly certain it's an electric guitar now, that electric guitar comes in, on the Cobalt, it's better separated than on the Mojo, where the Mojo just kind of blends that electric guitar frequency with the low bass rumble that's just really overpowering on the Mojo. Now, you may really like that. You may say, I want to have that type of experience, that warmer and more bass heavy experience, and that's fine. But between this A and B test, there's a leaner presentation with more definition and separation, which is the Cobalt, and then you have the more warm and closed off presentation, which is the Mojo. Let's go to Moons by MB. And Moons is a song that has its own version of manufactured bass, but it is not as manufactured as Angel. It's slightly toned down. So let's start with the Cobalt. And let's see, where are you, Mr. Cobalt? Here you are. Switch to A, and let's start Moons. When it starts off, there's this sizzling sound in the background. It's like static sizzle, which is really neat. Volume is at 65%, and that bass response is just fast. It goes dun 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 dun, very quick, very fast reverberation. It hits, lingers, moves on. Hits, lingers slightly, moves on. And there's this, I hear the piano in the background. I hear the drum, which goes dun 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 dun. The piano is now creeping up higher and higher in the volume, clearly separated from the bass. So there's like a bit of complexity to the bass. When it goes dun 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 dun, there's that reverberation, but there's also the strike, dun. When it hits down on the drum head, dun, like that comes through even though the reverberation carries on. So hard to explain, but there is clarity to the bass. Good separation. And now with the piano playing, the drum not playing, you can hear the sizzling in the background, the sizzling that started the song. Excellent separation. Let's skip ahead. We're about 2 minutes in. And very shortly, we should get to a pause in the music, and then drum strikes, and then the big bass. And I'll tell you exactly when it comes in. Right about now. Or now. Yeah, there we go. So let's go back just a little bit. I always forget exactly where it is. I think it's always 230, and it's never 230, obviously. It's about 235 or so. So the piano is playing, and then you have this, kind of an electric buzz in the background. And all that, oops, I'm sorry, I hit the microphone. All of that stops for a brief second, and then you have the drum, dun dun dun, right? Dun dun dun. And that stops. Then there's the briefest hesitation, and then there's that low rumble that comes back in. That dun 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 is fast. Like the last dun that hits doesn't interfere with that low rumble that comes in right afterwards. So let's listen for it again. I'm at 233. Yeah. It goes dun dun dun, and then slight pause because that last hit dun doesn't reverberate. You hear the sizzle in the background, and then the low rumble of bass comes in. Excellent separation, because what I hear is 3 or 4 distinct hits, dun 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 dun, right? Then I also hear underneath that sizzle, right? And then right after that, I hear that low bass rumble. Everything very cleanly and distinctly separated. Let's go back and let's look at the Mojo. Okay, we're switched to the Mojo, and let's start again. The sizzle is easily heard. But that bass is really reverberate. It's not a word. I don't think reverberate is a word. It reverberates a little bit more, in my opinion, than on the Cobalt. It might be a slight difference because it's just there's manufactured reverberation in the song to begin with. And when it's manufactured in, sometimes it's hard to tell when it's longer in one unit than another, if that makes sense. I hear that electric guitar, piano, and it's really overpowered by that bass. Like it's been creeping up in volume, but it hasn't surpassed the volume. Like on the Cobalt, it was easily heard, but with the Mojo, that bass is overpowering the piano. I think it's an electric piano. Forgive me if I'm wrong, but when you listen to it, you'll know what it is. Even now, when it's just that electric piano and no bass, you can hear the sizzle in the background, but the piano just sounds muffled. There's not a whole lot of clarity to it. With that low rumble coming back in slowly, the piano is just distorted and muffled. Let's skip to about 233. And at 235, we're going to hear that dun 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 dun. Yeah. So let's start again. Let's go to 235, and it's going to be dun 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 dun. That's how it's supposed to be. And I think that there's an interference between the last drum strike and then the beginning of that big bass rumble. Yeah, there's not enough separation for me to say that that they don't interfere with each other. It just lingers longer on the Mojo than it did on the Cobalt. The Cobalt simply presented those drum strikes cleaner and faster. Now we're talking about minute differences. It's not differences of a whole planet. It's minor things, but it's present, and the impression that it gives you is that, once again, the Mojo is a warmer, more bass-emphasized DAC amp, whereas the AudioQuest Cobalt is not. It's more on the lean side, and it just comes down to your sound preference. What signature do you like with a particular song? Okay, so let's talk about Drum Solo by Jack Bruce. Drum Solo by Jack Bruce starts off with, and Simon Phillips, can't leave him out, It starts off with people yelling and screaming, and then we start the drum solo. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this. I just want to get to the riffing part of the drums, which is about a minute into the song. And I want to hear whether it's, quote, visceral, more visceral in one player versus the other, and what type of sound signature I'm getting in one or the other. All right? So let's start with the Cobalt. Switching to the Cobalt here. Switching on the AB. And let's start. In this song, right at this big part, when he's hitting on the drum head left to right, right to left, you should be able to hear this, like the bottom dropping out of the drum. When he hits, it should go boing, boing, kind of that sound. And I do hear it. I've heard it better, say a THX, but I still hear it. Let's skip ahead to about 1 minute. And now he's riffing. Each drum strike is separate. Not the cleanest I've ever heard, but good separation. Meaning I can hear each drum strike, but there's a bit of mutedness to the drum strikes. Almost like there's maybe a thin layer of a bed sheet or something over the drum head as he's playing the drums. Not as sharp and as visceral as I've heard it on other devices. Okay, so let's switch now to the Mojo. Okay, we're on the Mojo. And let's start the song again. The volume on the Mojo is double blue, the first level of blue, which is equal volume, by the way, to 65% or so on the Cobalt, as close as I can get it. The bottom dropping out sensation is about the same on the Cobalt and on the Mojo, though I thought that it was maybe a little cleaner on the Cobalt. Minor difference, if any. Let's skip ahead to the riffing. I think that the drum strikes are about the same representation on both. If there is a difference, it's pretty minor. The only thing that the Mojo does that is noticeably different is that it has a closer soundstage, more closed off. And when there's that a lower bass hit, it just sounds thicker. Oops, I hit the microphone. It just sounds a little bit thicker than it did on the Cobalt. And as it keeps going, the reverberation seems to be about the same between the two. No significant difference, in my opinion. Okay. All right, so that's the end of the bass test. We tested 4 songs: Mountains, Angel, Moons, and the drum solo. My conclusion is the following. I think that with respect to general findings for bass, the Mojo is a much warmer amp DAC. The Cobalt is, in comparison, more lean, a little bit more analytical, and I think the separation of the sub-bass and the bass frequencies is better represented on the Cobalt than it is on the Mojo. Furthermore, I would submit that the Cobalt separation of instruments throughout a mix is better than it is on the Mojo for a couple of reasons. Number one, because the Mojo has a much more closed-off presentation and soundstage, it doesn't allow any air and therefore any real separation or significant separation amongst various instruments of different class. Second, because the Mojo has a bumped up bass response, which I think shouldn't be contested at this point by anyone, that bumped up bass starts interfering with other, first, sub bass frequencies and bass frequencies and the mids and the highs. It just kind of overpowers the rest of the mix, and it's dependent upon the particular song you're listening to and how it was mastered. Clearly, that is of paramount importance. However, when it is present, when a song has that low rumbly sub bass, that low rumbly sub bass, in my experience, has been overly represented on the Mojo, thicker, and is overpowering to the extent that it either hides the other frequencies or it melds the other frequencies, so there's no real separation, no hardline separation. Now, what do I mean by a hardline separation? Well, what I mean is, for example, in Angel, there were 3 layers of bass that I heard on the Cobalt. The low rumble, the mid distortion type of bass, then the drum strikes. On the Mojo, I heard the low rumble, and then I heard the drum strike, but it was muffled in comparison with what I heard on the Cobalt. The Mojo didn't, in my opinion, represent that middle ground. It just gave me a thick, low rumble, and that doesn't seem to be accurate. Furthermore, when you get into the higher frequencies, when you get past the low rumble, you have more distortion because that low rumble simply overpowers the other stuff in the song. That being said, the vocals came out fairly good on both. The warmer presentation on the Mojo when the vocal in Angel came out versus the slightly more analytical on the Cobalt. But what the Cobalt did that the Mojo simply is unable to do is that it's able to separate the frequency much, much better. So you heard the three bass frequencies as I spoke of. Then you heard I think it was electric piano or a guitar, whatever that instrument is, the synth instrument. Then you heard also the vocalist, and all of that was clear and defined. Okay, so that, for example, for that. Overall, I think if you're looking for a bass-heavy presentation and you like that low rumbly bass over all the other frequencies, then the Mojo is probably the better option if you're comparing the two. But if you're looking for something that has a cleaner representation and better separation, then the Cobalt, I think, will probably win that contest more often than not, if not every time. Overall, I think that you have some very good options available to you if you are considering one or the other purely for sound signature. Convenience and options aside, just for sound signature, rather different with respect to the bass. Thank you so much for listening and watching. Thank you so much for subscribing if you have subscribed. And I appreciate any comments and information that you may want to share in the comment section below. If you have a request for a review from any number of my gear, then please use the review request form that's in the description below. Once again, I am on Patreon. If you would like to help contribute to this channel, help me keep going, I would really appreciate it. I currently have 2 patrons, and I'm very thankful for both of them. You have really been very generous with your hard-earned money, and I truly appreciate that. And anyone else who may feel the need or the desire to donate to me, even if it's for a couple of bucks a month, I would truly appreciate that as well. And if you don't, that's okay. I appreciate every one of you who has subscribed. Thank you so much, and I hope all of you have a wonderful, beautiful Saturday.